To your point of do we need LLMs, I think they're not going to be the front and center. I think they're going to be tiny subparts of lots of them, like lots of fine-tuned mini agents with very specific tasks.
Hello and welcome to Credit Shift. My name is Paul Sweeney. I am the Chief Strategy Officer here at Webio. This series will be about how to embrace the digital future of credit and collections, AI, and all things technology. Join us for the conversations that matter about credit and collections. Today's guest is Chris Booth. Chris is the product owner for NatWest's group artificially intelligent agent Cora. Before that, Chris was a consultant at Filament AI, one of the first consultancy firms into the area of conversational AI and later into the machine learning area. Prior to that, Chris was at the Royal Air Force, where he worked on the Weapons Systems Support Rig, or WSSR, which uses real aircraft computers and a simulated environment to test the future hardware and software of one of the world's most powerful and fast jets, the Eurofighter Typhoon. If that isn't enough, and Chris, you can stop blushing. Chris most recently became his own individual contributor to the open source world through his Infer GPT project. Infer GPT's mission is to be an AI that knows you better than your best friend, a system that personalizes to who you are and what you care about. So welcome, Chris. My co-host, it's good to have you. My co-host today is again Dan Blogovich, a director of decision scientists and machine learning at Optima Partners. Dan works across a range of projects and industries, including high street banks, and in a previous life was also with Tesco Bank. So it's a great partner for me today to have on this podcast. So let's get started. Chris, could you tell us a little bit about the accessibility work NatWest did and has been working on it for a couple of years? It seems like that was a really interesting project and might have set you up for the future a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the short answer is we felt heavily limited by our previous provider who gave the front-end chat interface. And we had big ambitions, as you highlight, on making Cora far more accessible and usable. And by accessible, I mean, we started with some basics like giving the user the ability to control the font size, giving the user the ability to define how fast Cora types out text. And then there's a whole bunch of extra features, typical accessible features like changing colors, testing for color blindness, etc., etc. We couldn't do any of that. So the Cora team have invested and built our own entire front end from scratch for mobile and desktop that you see today, in short.
I was, I think, at the presentation in Scotland around, was it 14 months ago now? And I heard the presentation and I was just blown away by the ability to get into like real deep details about accessibility and having a program to get that accomplished. And I thought it was as interesting that as an organization you were able to get behind it. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why you thought that project succeeded.
I think like with most initiatives, it comes from leadership and executive support. And at the time, executive support was big on accessibility, diversity, having a great user experience and making our customers felt heard and personalized. Personalized is still a huge agenda for us, which we maybe chat on further with generative AI. I think that's simply why it came from top down. Let's make this accessible for all users, not just for the minority. And that's why it succeeded, frankly. We got the funding for it. We managed to, it was a large portion of our budget to be able to build this from scratch. And there's a lot of new teams and resource, and that only ever happens if you get top-down support.
Would you say, or are you able to share like what the outcomes of that were, or is it still in progress?
Still in progress. / I'd probably be the wrong person. I'd be like Mark Warden or Daryl. That would be better to describe the stats on that. I'm focused more at the moment on machine learning and early concepts like personalization, stuff like that.
And a natural step then from, I presume, conversational web chat or from chat to conversational web chat, maybe some early experiences there in maybe rules driven kind of flows
Well,
before you got into?
we're exploring like dynamic interfaces now. We're calling it. So at the moment, chat is still mostly chat bubbles with your cards and images, and it's better than just chat, but it's still pretty limited. So we're doing it's really early stages to exploring with mobile. How do we create a much more dynamic, flexible interface that combines like modern like UI UX modules typically you'd find in a mobile app, and how do we kind of get Cora to leverage those? I think a good example of what we're kind of pointing at is something Google recently released. They did a demo where they generated the interface depending on the conversation. And by generated, I think they had a list of modules, which then they generated and selected from. But that list of modules is way more flexible than we had currently. It was really, really clever.
Yeah, I think there's something yet in the area of browser innovation. Like, I still think there's a range of innovation coming down there. I've seen some really far out things that are more interesting than Web3 stuff was. Anyway, I'm fascinated by that. And so you went then from your web chat to your kind of bubble and conversation, like window driven stuff, to LLMs most recently. That's I presume spurred by the whole LLM explosion, OpenAI. That whole thing has opened up everyone's eyes. How's that journey then being as a next step for you?
Yeah, so these language models and the kind of the explosion in voice performance. We're also now exploring voice for accessibility too. So we're going through the whole shebang from what's Cora's identity, what's Cora's personality, to define what her voice sounds like, if it's her at all. And then we're also exploring kind of voice performances. How do we change our conversational journeys to match voice? Because if you slap on a voice with our current journeys, it would not work very well at all. So now we're looking to redesign all of our journeys to be much more fluid and conversational in a natural sense. So it's a massive rework. And then I might let you dig into that first before we dive into LLMs, because that's just another field again.
No, I'm kind of fascinated by this. It although it's something that we kind of know, to kind of hear it back is really interesting. That this is so much of a journey. It's like a constant level of innovation. Like, you're not going to get this done and then you're done. Like, great, we can redeploy this team elsewhere and we're on the next thing to fix. This really has the sound to me as it's much more of a continuing investment.
Always, yeah. It's just taking the philosophy that you can always be better. Simply.
Well, obviously, with the onset of, let's say LLM or large language model powered systems, there is a lot of nervousness about using those systems in a customer-facing environment. It's still new technology. We still don't know what it can throw in the way. Is that an area that you're actively running champion challenger methods, or are you still at the back end stages where it's more of an assistive tool, maybe to a CSR, a customer representative, rather than actually conversing directly with the customers?
We're using it in a lot of ways at the moment, and I think what's so fun and interesting being with Cora and retail is we have by far the highest bar of governance and risk standards, because you don't want to slap a language model on the front end so it can start recommending Bitcoin, because that's going to be really bad for the bank. So we have to go through that sort of governance compared to internal applications, just because of that risk and customer level. There's so many ways it could go wrong, as you highlight with deployment language models. So we've got like summarization is kind of an easy one. That's internal. So we're summarizing the conversation Cora has with the customer, sending that off to the agent to make the handover better. And then that will potentially elaborate into kind of subclass of summarizations. Maybe you could start providing the customer agents tips. You start providing profile information. There's a lot of stuff there. I'm also using it.
No, I was going to say that that's really interesting. But are there elements of the memory components or the memory retention ability of LLMs, and that you think could be exploited in the conversational aspect as well?
Exploited from hostile users or exploited for us as a benefit to the customer? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. No, when I hear exploited, it's normally by negative actors. So this is the irony with all this hype around Gen AI is I personally and my team, we're spending most of the time going back to basics, which is getting our data infrastructure in place, labeling our data, finding the bloody documentation in the bank, and making it usable and figuring out how do we store that. We're doing something we call FAQ bot, which is we're using a RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Basically, we've scraped our entire customer support website and now given that to Cora through a RAG infrastructure. And that's now expanded her knowledge tremendously. And that's just the beginning. Like now you could start potentially adding like financial information, financial advice information, and so forth. Yeah. And that works well. That's using generative AI because also we're chunking the text and then feeding it into the language model when it's classified on a question. And sorry if those listening aren't experts, pester me after and I'll do a beginner's breakdown of how it works. But I'm assuming the audience is fairly adept on this.
Oh, sorry. A lot of our audience won't really know like details of this at all.
Is it worth just breaking down what RAG is quickly?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So RAG, retrieval augmented generation, is kind of this new capability that's come onto the scene thanks to language models and their kind of general performance versus previous natural language processing methods. So like I said, basically how we do it is we've taken the whole website, we've chunked it, which basically means like each page, we've broken it down by 500 words a chunk. We give that chunk a number so that the computer understands like it's a representation. So for example, if I had the word banana, that would be represented 001 and the word apple would be 011. And then when a customer asks, how much are your bananas, we've gotten finance, we can pull up that information against the question, right? They'll have a similarity, and that's how we kind of extract large swaths of information. But the problem is when you chunk that 500 words, if you just gave that to the customer, that wouldn't make much sense, or it'd be hard to read. So we put it into a language model to rewrite it basically, and that's how RAG works. But to your point, Dan, on memory, everyone's calling RAG as like the solution to language models, and I think it's the furthest from. I think it's a great start and a kind of a good performance boost, but in terms of like how do we get Cora to be more personalized? How do we get Cora to ask less questions by referencing the knowledge base of the customer? Vector stores and RAG is not the way to go, in my opinion. So we're exploring other avenues.
Tremendous power of pre-trained algorithms. I think it's taken even the original developers by surprise how bloody good it can get. Is there a risk that's with this technology getting more and more sophisticated that people start getting the idea of artificial sentience? It's not really, but they'll start getting an idea that they are talking to a genuine sentient being with emotions and feelings. Or do you think that's a good thing if we go down that road, or should we put some parameters and bounds around where we use these tools and where we say we still need a human element to curate the output?
Oh, do we want to open this can of worms? This is a big topic. I don't think 99% of the population, maybe more, maybe less, know the definition of sentience. I don't. And I've been reading around this for a while now. And then there is a huge debate about anthropomorphism. Have I heard that correctly? Making your AI think it's human. We've not gone that far yet, and Cora is far away from achieving such performance.
Well, the reason I asked it is because of your contribution to the open source world, where you're attempting to build a friend who knows you better than your personal friend, which it's trending. And
well, it is interesting as a kind of architectural decision, and the challenge is that who does control your information, who does control your profile, And, under a Web3 structure, you would control your own profile and you would be able to send requests out to other bots and networks and have your own profile controlled under a Web3 architecture. So that I think that is the best possible way that it could go forward. It's just not the way that it's gone forward to date over the last 20 years. But I think that it's definitely worth, in the early stages of this next bounce, to get at least get the wedge in there and go, hey, you've got the option of, like, instead of using Google sign in, use your own sign in. And therefore, from there on in, if you're signing into the next service and the next service and the next service, you use your own sign in, or you use your own agent on your own infrastructure somewhere to control the memory of your conversations with other organizations.
I mean, that would be the dream, but just saying it out loud says to me that's just not viable, because most people, like, how would one fund their own infrastructure to store their own?
No, I don't think it's going to be an issue. I don't think it is. Like, back in the day, you would sign up for an email service and you would pay £5 or £10 a month to have, yourname.com, and people would send emails to you and they'd go in a server, and you paid for that space and you paid for that service. The real sin here is advertising. Like, advertising is the great corruption of every business model that's out there. And it hacks away at the integrity of product market fit for companies because it's so profitable. I'll come back to it because I think it's a real issue. If I'm an individual and I'm interacting with the bank, I, as an individual, know X about myself. The bank knows everything about everybody, is able to, draw out potential vulnerabilities that I don't know I have, and say, hey, Paul, you're kind of late with 2 out of 3 payments to this thing at the moment. Your bank balance is kind of really within 5 or 10% of limits at any one time. You're actually in danger of breaking a couple of limits around you that could have a material effects on you, and you should really think about managing your money. The bank's able to tell me that. I'm probably not able to tell myself that because I don't have the access to the data. So I think it comes down to where the data is stored and for what purpose it's stored for. And me contacting one organization and that being one history is one thing, but me contacting 5 different financial organizations, they now have 5 different conversational records of my conversations. And there's no one record of all those conversations. And that's where your memory of conversations becomes a really empowering thing later.
Well, I was on a fireside chat just yesterday, which was really interesting. Sorry, not yesterday, Sunday, it must be Friday, which was really interesting about maybe we don't even have conversations with our providers anymore. Our AI agent goes away and does it for us. That would actually tick your box of having data localized, but also all conversations merged into one, because your AI agent goes and has it for you.
Well, let me tell you, and again, forgive me for being so talky. I was speaking many years ago with a contact center manager, and we're talking about automation at the contact center, and they're going, no, our agents speak to the customers, and the customers love that interaction, and it actually builds relationship with our company, and we very much value this. And we said, okay, let's look a little bit closer at this. So we went and we looked at the agents, and what was happening was the agents had 3 screens open, and they couldn't get the data fast enough from the other screen to their worktop to get the information to answer the customer's query. So you're calling from Birmingham. What's the weather like there today? And the person would go, oh, it's very misty, or da-da-da-da. They'd go on, so, it's like that last time I was in Birmingham. And the agent's all the time just waiting for the information to come up on their screen. So it started as a hack that they were using to keep the customer conversation going while the data got there, right? And it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then you say agents will never, the people working, the tellers at the bank, that's a vital piece of infrastructure because you go there, it's social, I trust you. And then you find out a couple of years later, no, actually people are happy doing most of their transactions digitally and want people for specific problems they can't get. And so when you look at the real jobs that the individual is doing, I think that job that the human is doing is changing. And I think it's changing from, getting information to explaining to maybe giving you confidence or doing some other labor or other work that a computer isn't suitable for. And one of the things that I find with myself is, if a computer tells you I'm gonna work on that and I will be back to you when I have a solution, don't worry, I'm working on it. Versus when a person says, Paul, I hear you, I know that this is important to you, I'm going to just do everything I can to make that happen for you. I go, that's a person to person commitment as individuals. And it's a completely different experience when a person tells you they're going to do everything in their power to help you. It's a human commitment. And I think that's a different experience than a computer saying there's a good chance that I'll be able to solve this for you. So I think the nature of work and the nature of how we support relationships is going to change. And
I think if I understood right, what you were alluding to earlier on in the discourse is having a trans-organizational across different companies repository of conversational content, a little bit analogous to how credit reference agencies hold financial data. Is that what? If now, I think it's an interesting idea, but I think the distinction here is that we're talking about objective data generated by objective activity versus something that's generated through essentially the way that conversation is being had, which is kind of leads me a little bit on the way that prompts work and questions are being asked. Because I can ask the same piece of information 3 different ways, and I'll get 3 slightly different answers from the same individual. Is there a risk, therefore, that if we try to treat that conversation, quote, objective information, bias in the way that we do retrieve information, that we do generate the information through the way that different organizations will ask the same questions?
I know what you're saying. So there's a little bit of breakup there. Let me just kind of summarize it again and just see if I'm correct. So if a prompt or a slightly different prompt elicits different responses from different inputs, that different people asking the same question, how is that going to produce any sort of an objective outcome?
Yeah, so to give a very simple example, I might ask, what's the weather like in Birmingham? Or I might ask, how sunny is it in Birmingham? They both relate to weather, but they are actually asking a very different question. Obviously, I'm giving a silly example, but that's the nature of...
It's the nature of language, right, and cultural context. Chris, do you have any inputs to that?
So, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot too, and I think I've got 2 chains of thought there. One, I don't have high hopes for prompt engineering in the long term. I think it's going to be absorbed or become... So, for example, there's a new framework I've not had a chance to look into yet, but my colleague Andy has DSP in capitals and then lowercase y, right? And it's something to do with it's a new language that... DIPSI. That sounds like it's solving the prompt engineering problem. I've not had a chance to into it, so I can't really talk, but maybe, Paul, you have?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Okay, so do tell how that solving the prompt engineering by quote.
Basically, my understanding of it is that it's an orchestration mechanism. It's a bit like LangChain. And what it's doing is it's saying, look, for this question, go to this model. And so what it's really doing is going to allow you to have multiple models that you control, and then DIPSI kind of manages the orchestration between them and where the routing of that goes.
Right.
And so it's an interesting question because, Dan, it goes to your point around, if I ask the same question, there's like tolerances on that question. But if it's hitting the same model and the same version of that model, it's unlikely to be changed that much. So you've got to have a way of controlling and saying, if I'm asking this, how do I quality assure it? And so therefore you need tools to quality assure that your prompt and response are aligned. And then as you get different models, then you're going to need to say, okay, well, I want to always use this model. Don't change it. It's like, don't be the newest version of OpenAI. Don't be the newest version of whatever It's like, that's my model, don't change it. I'm happy with my answer. And therefore you want to control it in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be where multiple small models or tiny models will actually allow you to control, because you can keep them small, you can keep them local, and they'll do the job for you. Like, they don't have to answer how fast does a leopard in Africa, run if the wind is 30 miles an hour in his face.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, is this account open? Yes or no? When is the closing date for the application? It's very controlled environments, very controlled contexts.
Logical conclusion: do we need LLMs to do that? Because if we, and I mean, by the way, I do agree with your prospect, but if we are concerned, quite rightly, around version control of some of these base models, long prompts, short prompts, and the way that perturbing just small words will give us a very different answer, and therefore we constrain the use and the application of the models. Do we even need this new technology?
I think so. Yeah. So there's two extra thoughts to finish off the kind of whole topic, right? I think one, I feel there's a straw man against chatbots and AI at the moment. And to give you a specific example, if you ask 5 different banks the same question, you'll get 5 different answers, or at least a variety of. Maybe they'll still all adhere to governance, right? It's impossible to get one human, different customer service center. So I guess it's really important, and and this is the kind of rabbit hole I'm going down at the moment. Why is it okay for 5 different contact centers to provide different answers to what's the weather in Berlin, but not for the AI, for one? And maybe we'll just park that, because that's a whole different topic. But then also, to your point of, do we need LLMs, Dan? I think yes, but they're not going to be the front and center, and they're not going to be the end all of the whole system. I think they're going to be tiny subparts, like Paul said, and lots of them, like lots of fine-tuned mini agents with very specific tasks, and that kind of reduces this kind of prompt scope a lot. And I think the prompt's going to be actually tiny with lots of data fed in. It's probably a bit like the RAG structure we have now. The LLM doesn't have any sort of intelligence at all. Its sole job is just to rewrite that answer. So I think it's a kind of a null point.
There is another kind of reframing of that as well, which is, if you've got like I always say, someone says, well, what's this generative AI stuff good for? And I go, well, the clue is in the name, generative. It's great at generating something. So if you've got a blank page problem and you need to say, hey, how do I even get started with this? If you know how to prompt yourself up and get something going and getting the flow going, your early part of the work just gets you going, and then you kind of, who to call, or you've got other details you can follow up on. But a lot of people lose themselves in that first step. And the second thing is, where you step out of a domain, it helps you kind of wrap your arms around the initial concepts, and then you can follow it up. So it's unusual in that we're kind of applying the existing processes and existing structures, rules to a new technology that it's not built to do that. Like, no. It is not a predictive technology. It is generative technology. And yet we're trying to get it to do...
It's technically predictive. It's an auto-regressive model.
True.
Yeah.
But not in a way that you could go, like, every time I press the button, it's going to give me the same answer. And if it doesn't, I can't use it, which is a lot of the complaints against it. It's like, hey, if this was right 999,000 times out of a million, I still couldn't use it because I know it's going to be wrong 3 times. And that's too much.
Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, obviously, Chris, as you say quite rightly, they are predictive. They generate something that wasn't there previously. I mean, people often talk about statistically driven predictive models as being stochastic. They're not really. Once a model is trained, it's locked, it's fully deterministic. There's a set of inputs. It'll always give me the same, quote, prediction or output. This is different. Now, so in terms of validation processes, how much validation can we actually generalize from our existing frameworks? And especially if we talk about, say, an oversight function, which is used to some validation, let's call industry standard methods. How do we generalize some of that to give oversight functions the confidence to even approve some of these systems to go anywhere near live deployment?
We're taking two approaches. One is we're working closely with our governance and risk teams. And for example, this FAQ bot we went through was a perfect demonstration of how our current model risk procedures and questions are not fit for purpose. Like, for example, unfortunately, it wasn't myself directly that went through it, but the feedback and summary I got was the current model, the current analysis was not fit for purpose of RAG. They were asking questions that just either didn't make sense or were just mute questions. So we're working with the governance teams to kind of expand the scope and help iterate on those frameworks. And we're also having more philosophical questions like the one I asked of, let's say these AI systems start getting smarter and smarter, and let's just say for argument's sake, you've got two black boxes, one's a human, one's an AI, and they answer the same thing. When do we start increasing the scope, if at all, with AI? And I refer back to my example earlier of, I can't quite remember, but for example, if an AI passes the FCA level 6 exam, can it provide financial advice?
It's an interesting notion. I haven't really thought about bots passing exams and qualifying to be practitioners. But I guess that we do have precedents of that assistive technology in the healthcare setting. So certainly AI is playing an increasing role in diagnostics. Is that an area that we can borrow some learnings from as we move into more use cases here?
Yeah, I think so. I think, do I dare say, we're slightly less lenient than healthcare. I think healthcare it's so tied up in its risk profile that I'm skeptical AI systems such as for diagnosing are ever going to be put in place. I'm hopeful that, for example, giving Cora the ability to be able to provide like at least financial options and guidance. I don't think it'll ever do advice like buy Bitcoin. It will go, here's your options based on your profile. That's kind of our vision we've got. That's what I hope for. But again, to get to the AI to such a state, I think is going to need an overhaul or a review from the governance and risk guys to understand and appreciate that AI might even get there in the first place. But we're going to have to start accepting some ambiguity. What banks love right now about chatbots and logic trees is it's deterministic and it's factual, like X, Y, Z. But what happens if it can start saying X, X, Z? If that answer can still be acceptable, but it's not what we've exactly said. And that's like almost, I think it's a mindset shift more than a technical issue. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts.
Oh, I agree.
I think, you've hit the nail on the head, and that's where I draw the distinction between this stochastic nature and deterministic nature. Exactly that. There is a level of unpredictability that we can never test 100% the predictability of the answer. And I think that's what scares a lot of oversight functions, is the fact that there is an unobservable space that we just can't ever test with even in the infinity of time, which ultimately, are humans any different? So that's the
I think
counter-argument.
that I'm just going to speculate here, but I think, for instance, if a bot passes an exam and they're a qualified accountant or a qualified financial analyst, right, and they know how to calculate things and they know what the rules are, the thing that you're kind of also waiting for is an agent who has many years experience who can go, the way this customer is answering questions or hesitating or pausing leads me to believe that they don't actually understand what I've just told them, even though they're saying they do understand what I've just told them. And years of experience will have prodded you to go, actually, I'm just going to ask a question, which is, hi, Mary, are you on your own at the moment? Oh, no, my husband's with me. It's like, okay. And then that might lead you to another question. And what you're really doing as a human is you're exploring this other human's social, cultural life and experience around them. And every now and then you find out that the person was being coerced, or they were under undue influence of another person to withdraw money or to do something. And it's experience and understanding humans that gives you that ability to ask the question. Now, if your bot is trained up on 1 million conversations or 10 million or 100 million voice conversations, it's going to get pretty good at those kind of edge cases. And I think what it'll do is it'll just bring it to the attention of the agent to go, it's worth asking, is this person, here's the coercive control question. Hey, would you like anyone to deliver pizza to your house today? Elizabeth Stokey has this great example of a woman ringing up the police and saying, please answer the phone, London Metropolitan Police, how can I help you? Yeah, I'd like a pepperoni pizza, please. And also 2 Cokes. If you could have them delivered to my house, 72 Bella Lane. And this is the police. It's like, oh, okay. This person's ringing me up to get help because she's controlling violence in her house in a violent situation. She's ordering pizza as her alert. Now, there's no way a system is ever going to pick that up, right? It's just so culturally specific.
Unless the police trained it to pick up such a thing. So, okay, if you get up to Cora, any future iteration it's going to fail. I think you'd hope the police bots have been trained on that.
I think that just this maybe 2 points on that. One is that I think that how things are trained, the scale at which they're trained at, will make agents better because it'll give them prompts and questions to say, maybe ask a little bit more about this, maybe probe a little bit more about that, to investigate if someone's sharing information as fully or not sharing like they need to be to get a good resolution to their answer. And that's going to be difficult, but that's almost like an economics question. How much money am I willing to spend on training to get these kind of outcomes? And it's also what LLMs are very good at, which is kind of disambiguation. So if you ask it, what's the situation, and you've all the data, it's going to be very, very good at doing that. It's going to be very, very good at saying, this is a question about withdrawing money, but has potential of being under duress or something like that, and getting that alert when you wouldn't have gotten it before.
I think that's true, but there is an element. I mean, obviously, hallucination is a big issue with LLMs. So it's giving something that's syntactically correct, but semantically doesn't, in the context, doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think the challenge that we still, I don't think we've grappled with, is the notion that anything that these systems are trained on is taken as not as truth, but as factual. So that if we interrogate a conversation, the input data is assumed that whoever created it meant it to be what it is. So there's no notion of lying or deliberately saying something that's not factually correct. Now, that's probably inferable if you have a large enough training data set. But in the context of these smaller mini models built on smaller data sets, which are local to a jurisdiction or a sector or even an organization, that becomes a very, very difficult problem to solve, I think.
What specifically on that last bit, Dan?
Just the ability to capture the notion of data that's being fed in. It's not necessarily factually correct. It's not intended to be factually
fed into the model.
So, for example, if I'm talking to a customer who's might be vulnerable, they might be telling me not false information, but they might be giving me partial information which will make them not look vulnerable just because they don't want to be seen to be vulnerable. If I'm training all of my models on that kind of data, then I don't really have a very good handle on using the end results to identify in a future conversation, okay, this customer is potentially vulnerable.
I think unless the model is specifically trained on such a thing, I'd totally agree. I think so for 99% of future customer service AI agents, no, they're not going to pick it up. But again, for example, if I use the police example, I'd hope that if they decide to automate 999, that have models specifically trained to know, or maybe like sentiment analysis or voice tonality.
There is actually a real life example of that, which is, nothing to do with financial services, but I think it was in the press. Somebody said, "Give me a picture of a World War II German soldier," and I think this was
Gemini,
and up came
Gemini, Google.
Yeah, exactly. So I became a modern cosmopolitan German from today's world, which from a mixed background and what have you. So I think that's the danger that we risk having in I guess in training these models going forward, but especially on smaller data sets.
Well, one of the things that Dan, we do is just to make sure that if you have a focused language model, that you've trained it on data that you've got like permissions to access, permission to use, etc. And then you can actually see the full model, the testing, the fit, and then be able to run that as a continuous process so that you've got continuous fit with the conversation and the data. And I think that for enterprises like banks and financial institutions, you're just going to have to look at it as a continuous process and be able to continuously analyze the fit. The thing that we're not going to get a chance to talk about today, because we're running out of time, folks, is I'm fascinated by the boundaries that we see today on the models. Like, I think we're in the guts of these things, and we know the limits, right? We know the mistakes they make, how difficult it is to get them, how much work you have to do to get them to do anything. But I think we're in the early stages of the technology still, and I'm fascinated by like our properties going to emerge from these models, foundation models. Are the new agent infrastructures going to emerge where you can have much more agent-based interaction? And I think that the multimodal inputs have a potentially massive impact on the amount of data that it's actually looking at. Like, these things, like you could technically take your all-day streaming cameras from every bank front counter in every branch in the UK and just consider that input to your LLM to do something else with. So I think we could go on forever on this. I think, Chris, I'll leave you with the last question. I know that you had a question you wanted to pose.
Yeah, I got a question for you guys, which is with the tech giants consuming more and more of the AI space with, to be fair, increasingly capable platforms, referencing a couple such as Google's recent AI agents builder or IBM's Watson X. How do agencies, startups, and small businesses kind of keep competitive in this space?
Yeah, I'll have a go. So if we, as I said, maybe at the start, is there are battles we choose to fight and there are battles we choose not to fight. So if we kind of decompose the notion of LLM systems into I would call them 4 basic building blocks. So base models, instruction tuning, fine tuning, and RAGs towards the end. I think organizations like ourselves and smaller players and startups should really focus just on the final 2, i.e. fine tuning and the RAG stages. I don't think we stand a chance of fighting against the big corporates who train the base models and who do a large part of instruction tuning, just because of the huge computing power that they can purchase and, frankly, access to the data that we wouldn't have. So that would be my first port of call, is to choose which part of that overall journey we focus on and really make that a competitive advantage. Paul, I don't know if you've got to, yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, of course, I'll always have something to say. It's so two things that strike me. One is that it's kind of important that we think about our own mental models and our own analogies, and that language doesn't become a trap for us, and that we kind of are constantly thinking about the analogies we use, because I think it kind of boxes in our thinking. And I think if we accept the wrong framing of this, it sends us down a particular path that isn't like it isn't even scientifically the way the system would work. And I got that from an analyst at Telco 2 many years ago, when he was talking about how telcos think about data like containers. It's like containers of data, and it was a whole metaphor that they used for shipping data around. And it actually was just statistically not the way a network was, a multiplex network worked. It's not the way the maths worked. And therefore it led them down a train of thought that was billions of dollars later, expensive, very expensive. So I think that we just need to be careful about the language and the metaphors that we use to conceptualize the whole problem in itself. And secondly, the analogies that we use technology-wise, like thinking about this as, which I've been thinking about it as, is like, these are just going to be like databases for companies. So like if your language model was like a database, what would you want to control? What would you want it to work like? What would it mean? As opposed to it's a storage mechanism, or it's a processing mechanism, or it's like, if it was just a database, like everyone has an Excel sheet, what do you put into it? Everyone has a database, what do you put into it? And if it becomes something analogous to that kind of a tool, then learning from things like Excel and databases, what is it that would be the impact of it down the line? So I think, for our view of Webio is very much that, it has been for a long time, that it's going to be many models. You need to control them all. You need to have a view on what's being trained and how it's being trained and the jobs it's doing for you, and just treat everything like it's ethical AI. And, you won't go far wrong with those kind of principles. And, the products that you get and the features you release, they should be based on kind of foundational thoughts that you have about how this stuff works. Because, you'll know every day something's going to pull you in a different direction. So I think you have to have some theories and some convictions about how you think about it and how you reflect on it and how you discuss it, and being kind of thoughtful about that. And I think that kind of sends you off in the right direction.
Interesting.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, folks, I think we've done a good job here of staying more or less on track. Chris, I'm pretty sure we could go for another hour or two, no problem, talking about this stuff. But look, another time, another date. It was great of you to share your experience. There are not many companies that are as mature in their use of it as you guys are, because of the experience you've gained on that journey. And I think there's a ton of learnings that people could take from how you guys have challenged it. Dan, thank you again for joining us today. I know you're very busy and working on a ton of these projects across a range of sectors. So I really thank you for taking your time out today. And I thank everyone for joining us for this interview. I hope you got as much from it that we did. We always learn as much from doing them as anything else. So thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us for that amazing conversation. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss any of these future leaders talking about the changes in the credit and collections business. And also, why not drop into webio.com and see what we're doing these days.